I just want to say thank you everyone for coming out. I know right now we're in really crazy times, so I hope that this will be a good distraction and also a good resource for everyone. Today's webinar is on negotiation, and let's see, we have two panelists. One's my father-in-law, Mr. Levinson, and he's a regional sales director with Texthelp. That's with educational software. And then we also have Mr. Hansen, who's a human resource consultant for North American plant breeding. He works at Corteva. So with that, we just want to go ahead and put a few announcements out for everyone. We have quite a few more webinars coming up. One's about utilizing video for science communication. Another's speaking science. So this is more for like the public and also using social media as a platform. And then another one we have coming up is like how to craft a personal or diversity statement. So there'll be announcements on Facebook and Twitter and through the listserv. And also, if you're not getting listserv emails, that might be because you're not a member of NAPB. So if you want to receive those, then you can join through our website. Also, we just wanted to remind everyone that the Borlaug Scholars program, it was extended, so you still have a few days to submit, but you can no longer initiate application. Then another one is for NAPB this year. There's a Diversity Enhancement Travel Award, so we really encourage you to look into that and apply for it if you want funding to help go to NAPB. You can learn more about the requirements online. And also the conference website just went live, and it's going to be at the University of Nebraska this August, and hopefully it still continues. So you can check out that website. So real quick, Mr. Levinson, you can go ahead and share your screen. I'll stop my share, and you can share the few slides that you want to share before we start.
So is that working? Can everybody see that? What's the value?
Actually, I'm seeing mine.
All right, hold on.
I see yours, Jeff.
Okay, good, good. So just to add a little bit of background, so that everybody knows, my undergraduate degree actually was in mathematics from a place called the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And I've got my MBA from Stanford Business School out in California. So that was kind of fun to kind of see a different place. And I have been working basically for about 35 years in sales and marketing. I started out in marketing, and in the early 90s moved over to sales. So I've been in sales for quite a few decades, working out of my home office, which you can see behind me. And one learning point, if you're doing virtual interviews, if you notice, Uriah has this beautiful background of mountains and solidness and all that. And I kind of have a background of books and all kinds of crazy stuff. So it's more advisable. It's more advisable to use Uriah's background than mine. So that's just an early tip as you get started. And I have a Cooperstown, New York jersey because I'm a huge baseball fan. So I asked Chandler if I could do a slide at the beginning and a slide at the end. And because in negotiating, I think there's lots of things to think about. And I want to kind of give you a kind of a crazy example of kind of just some things to think about. I have this piano in the house. It's a Steinway piano from 1892. Through one of my in-laws, I was able to get it at a very reasonable price. And it's a beautiful piano and all that. But I'm kind of a crazy person. And I said, you know, I've got this lovely piano. You know, I like the fact that it's very old. And I wanted to buy and acquire a silver dollar. And if you can see that, it's an 1892 silver dollar. And a silver dollar is worth, what is it worth? As you think about negotiations, there are some things you need to think about in terms of worth. And I understand in this case, it's a silver dollar as opposed to an individual and a position. But here are just some things to think about. And I don't know if you all can see this. I think my little, yeah, I'll minimize it. Good. Okay. So we have something in business, and this is pretty obvious, and we do it all the time naturally. It's called economic value to the customer. What is something worth to an individual or system? So these are just some things to think about, and you're going to find we're going to come back to these probably throughout our time together and maybe at the end as well. So there's a lot of what I call market dynamics involved. Supply and demand is the most obvious. And clearly, and everybody knows this, if I have a lot of something and very little demand, so nowadays, what's interesting is in the oil market, gas in particular for us, there's a tremendous amount of supply for lots of different reasons. And demand is low, and we know why. So what do you think is going to happen to the price of gas? We've already seen it, and there are some people that are projecting gas to go down to $1.50 a gallon. That may or may not happen, but the point is there's a supply and demand dynamic. It's the same thing with you as you kind of go out into the marketplace. If there's a lot of people applying to a particular position, then it's going to be harder in terms of driving the value up, et cetera. So that's just one facet. And for my coin, the question that is out there is how many of these 1892 silver dollars are there? If there's a lot, then I won't pay very much, and if there's very few, then I'll end up paying more. What other competing interests do I have? Maybe I could have said, instead of $1, I want a quarter from that time, or a penny, or a nickel, or some other way to satisfy that need that I had. That will affect the price or the worth or the value of something. How urgent is the need? Typically, if you're interviewing with schools, there's typically a school calendar. This is obviously an odd time. That will obviously also drive your negotiating capability. Are there other alternatives? Instead of this coin, could I have gotten maybe a baseball card, since I'm a big baseball fan back then? That was a good alternative for me, because what I really wanted, was something that had the 1892 date imprinted on it, so I could say, gee, these things are both 128 years old. So that's just part of the market dynamics. There's other things you can talk about as well. Personal budget. After spending all the money on the piano, did I have any money left over for the silver dollar? If the answer is yes, and I'm sitting on oodles of cash, then maybe I'm a little bit more flexible in my negotiation and my willingness to go to a higher price. If, however, money is very tight because I spent it on moving the piano, for example, which I did, I moved it up from Florida, well, then I'm going to be more limited. Again, these are pretty obvious, but you'd be surprised at how oftentimes, in terms of when we negotiate, we forget about these things. How much do I really want this coin? Is it very important to me? Is it kind of minimally important to me? How important is the position that you're seeking? Is it critical for the hiring entity? Is it not critical? Again, just some of the things to think about. So Chandler, that's all I have in terms of the beginning. Just wanted to stop. I'll stop sharing there, just to kind of stimulate the mind a little bit in terms of some things to think about.
That's great. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so while we're keeping that in mind, then let's go ahead and shift over to some of these questions that we've prepared, and maybe that scenario will come back up. So first off, we wanted to ask you, well, I guess this is more for Mr. Hansen, but do you think that you're able to negotiate more in academia or industry, or both about equal?
Yes, so a little bit of my background. So been with Corteva just about 6 months, but prior to that, been all in private industry sectors. So a lot of my experience lends to that. But what I will say is, as you look at academia versus industry, industry has the opportunity to increase revenues a lot more rapidly, or has more levers to pull those. So, from a philosophical standpoint, industry is going to give you that higher opportunity to negotiate and have more flexibility, versus academia, who comes in with a budget, understands what their class sizes and their revenues are going to look like. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But you all as students are also probably thinking through, there's pure advantages between academia and industry as well, as far as what you want to get out of your careers. And I think one of the big things as we go through all these questions and talk about it is, you have to understand what you want as an individual before you go into any negotiation. So if you're negotiating in academia because money is what you're after, then you probably should sit back and question, is academia where I really want to be? because academia and money don't normally go together.
Okay, great. We'll probably move to the next one. So,
Well, Chandler, I just have just one thing to
okay, great.
and that is there may be other items you negotiate. So it may be true that salary is sort of fixed. This is both in academia and industry,
Yep.
But there may be other alternatives. For instance, vacation time. In academia, it may be you have a travel allowance or budget or grants or however that. So sometimes, and I think Uriah's point is absolutely right in terms of the raw number that you get, but there's lots of other factors that you can weigh in that may be advantageous.
Yeah, I think, Chandler, before we even get too far into this, piggybacking off of what Jeff just talked about on value and worth, what is your value as a candidate? So the one thing we have to keep in mind here, and I think, the large majority of this group is still in, grad school or PhD, still in getting their degree. So what you really have to think about is, what do I bring unique to the table? And be conscious that there could be someone with 10 years of experience in the world going for the same position you are. So we also have to keep that in mind as you're going through negotiations at any point of what can you negotiate for. Like Jeff said, if I'm going to negotiate for vacation, okay, but what grounds do I have to stand on to request that? So keep that in mind as you go through all of this. It may not be pertinent to you right now, here today, but in 3 to 5 years, you may have, more grounds to stand on as you look at different opportunities.
Yeah, true, definitely. Okay, so our next question is, so is there anything that people should research or try to know before they go into negotiation?
Jeff, do you want to start from a hiring manager perspective of more the business side?
Sure, absolutely. So my opinion is there's lots of things to know. So whatever organization you're moving into, for instance, I just hired someone to work with me in the Southeast region, and they had done a little bit of work on their own in terms of researching the company, a little bit of the industry. You've got to be a little careful because you're never going to know what's really going on within a company until you join that company. But that's kind of point number one, is to say, all right, what are the values that this company has? What are some of the things they're pursuing? There are lots of entities, and one of which I'll refer you to at the end. It's called Glassdoor, and it kind of has some opinions. And there's a couple of those types of entities that will kind of give you a feel for the culture of an organization, whether it be academic or industry. And I think that's important. I think it's important to understand a little bit, and Uriah indicated this, what might be my competition? Are they all looking for postdocs? Are they looking for just recently gotten postdocs? Are they looking for 10 years of experience? That's important. What kinds of benefits do they offer? A lot of that can be found online. You can kind of go to websites and see, oh, look, they have 2 weeks vacation and 4 weeks. So it was very interesting to me. The person I hired was very concerned about how, believe it or not, how we do expenses. And I thought to myself, I would never ask that, because it's a professional organization. You would just assume how expense reimbursement is, and I've been around a while. If I travel somewhere, if I do anything on the company, it's just going to be reimbursed. But that was interesting. So they had done some research and weren't really concerned about our company, but that was important to them. So I think there's a lot of stuff you can kind of study. I would never go in and say, oh, Uriah, I know all about your organization. I would never do that. However, in the back of my mind, I would say I have researched, and I might ask some questions of him that are directly related to what I found.
Yep, nope, I agree, Jeff. And I go back to, I've sat on both sides of the fence, from HR and as a candidate negotiating. I think it's important to understand, how do you get some of those pieces? All too often people get caught up in the dollars. But like Jeff mentioned, you have vacation, you have, tuition reimbursement, all these different benefits that are out there. But you really need to understand what those offers are before you even get to the offer standpoint. So as you're going through an interview, understanding, can you share benefits packages? Can you share this? To give you all that information, you all are, smart people, scientists, you love to dig in. So what information can you get ahead, whether it's on the open market. Glassdoor is a great piece because it helps you understand what should I be making. Don't take it for granted. Don't take it for the Bible. It's self-reported, so we all know how that goes. But build your case of what you think you're worth and the open market's going to pay as you start going through that interview process. Because the one thing is, and I always think on negotiation, when the offer is extended, you should know what you want. It shouldn't be I'm going to react now that this offer is on the table. I know I want X dollars, X vacation, so that you can respond, really rapidly or right on the spot. So you need to understand, again, what you want coming into this and what is most important for you. Again, is it time off? Is it dollars and cents? Is it growth potential? And those are all things that you have to, the way of what's important to me now. And I think the one that gets overlooked a lot is, growth potential. Is that you can't put a dollar sign on that, but oftentimes, as you all move through your careers, you'll figure out, I'm at a salary point that I'm comfortable, but I really want to experience different things. Well, that may be worth taking, some pay cut to be able to get those experiences and opportunities that in the long run are going to pay off better for you. So really make that checklist of what's important to me before you even start your job search, so that you know what you should be asking as you're interviewing and meeting with companies.
Great. Did either one of you want to say anything else before we go to the next one?
Yeah, I've got one, Chandler, and I'll just give you guys what may seem like a strange one. The benefits package is pretty significant, and I'll just give you guys two examples. So I have been with this current company. This is my 11th year with Texthelp, and our benefits package. And I have a pretty large family. So the benefits package, especially if you talk about health insurance, we all know it's skyrocketed over the years. Well, our company, for the first 8 years, charged $300 a month for health insurance for our family. And that was health, medical, dental, and vision. That is a phenomenal price. And the fact that they kept it level for all those years, some people just say, well, the salary didn't really increase that much, which it didn't. But the fact is that the company sort of paid for all those health benefits. I have one of my sons as a teacher at a school district in Georgia, and he actually pays more per month. It's he and his wife. They pay more per month for their health coverage, which is not as good as the one I have than I do. And it went up from $300, now it's $400 a month. Still a very insignificant sort of bump in the long run. And you all have heard it is hundreds of dollars a month. Younger people less, but if you start talking about a couple or a family, it's very significant. And that's just one aspect of that benefits package that Uriah was referring to. So just something to think about.
Okay, nice. Then let's move on to the next one. So how do you even approach management to negotiate this? Or how do you initiate it?
Yes. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. So one of the courses I took in business school was from one of the world's leading negotiators. And so there's two. So I think you have to think about, there's the whole preparation aspect. So if you go in, you have to go in with the knowledge of, what are they asking? What do I think they can be paying? What does the job pay? So if you go into a job that's paying $45,000 a year, roughly, and you go in asking for $90,000, what do you think is going to happen? Not only will that negotiation go very poorly, but it will be reflected on you that you came in with this wild, crazy expectation. So I think you have to sort of, again, that's kind of where research is, as best you can. And it's hard sometimes, but what you try to do is find colleagues that maybe are in like positions. And again, you can go to the website, different websites to try to figure that out. That's one thing. The other thing is, the data says that if you negotiate as a really hard negotiator, I'm unbending, unyielding, The data actually says that you actually might end up winning in the short term. However, long term, you might not. And so I think your attitude of negotiation has to go, sort of be part of this. How am I going to go in? Not wishy-washy, but am I flexible, or am I going to kind of do a take it or leave it stance? And then you have to think about where in the negotiation process you are. Sometimes, you can negotiate more up front than when you're kind of towards it. Take this law, this legislation that just passed. It's one thing at the beginning when they're crafting the legislation to have all sorts of ideas. When it's about to be signed and you then change the dynamic, that is very inappropriate. So, I don't know if that helps or not, but I'll turn it over to Uriah to fix what I did wrong.
No, I think, these questions sort of go in sequential order of, the first step is understanding what's important to me. The second step is, I don't know if Jeff or I have really laid out what can you negotiate on? We sort of touched on it. I think there's, salary is the big one. That's the easy, I shouldn't say easy, but that's the big bucket. And then there's benefits, but there's so many pieces to benefits and there's so many strings attached to each of them. Your medical and healthcare and some of those fixed cost benefits, you really can't negotiate on them. I mean, those are group mandated rates that the company has already bargained for. You can't say, I want an extra $50 a month from the company to pay for my medical. It's not going to happen. But a big benefit is time off. So that's something, and that continuously evolves in the industry right now of what is out there. But time off is one of the big buckets that I think is out there to negotiate on. And then a sign-on bonus. Those are sort of the three buckets from my end, from HR, that someone can really negotiate for. Coming in prepared, but also building a rational case of what is your value for the company to offer you that, what you're thinking. Or a candidate that comes in and just says, I want $110,000 and a $20,000 sign-on bonus. Well, if you tell me that, I'm going to say, okay, well, I want a yacht, but I don't have it. So you have to build your case again of, hey, I would like this amount and this bonus, and this is why. Maybe it's you're at a current employer, and by leaving at this point in the year, you're missing out on a bonus or a retention or something like that. Maybe it's you're at this salary. And I think the important thing here is be honest and rational. If you're making $50,000 a year today and you're asking for $100,000 just because you think you should, you're not being rational. Clearly we all want to make moves for the betterment of ourselves, but also understand the business is making a risk on you. And so you have to take a risk back on them sometimes as well as you're looking at these.
Great. Okay, let's go.
It's my approach. Sorry, Chandler.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
I think, a negotiation, you should know what you want going into it. So it shouldn't be, I give you an offer and a week later you come back with a counter. You should know what you want coming into it. And I would say within a few hours of that initial offer, you should have those points back. And that goes to show the hiring team too, that you've thought this through and you already understood what you wanted and needed in the position.
Yeah, that's really good to know. I didn't know that, honestly. Okay, so the next one is, this one's, I guess, more personal and directed towards maybe half the participants, but can or should you negotiate for maternity leave? Is that possible?
I'll answer that, Jeff, just because it's probably more HR related. So maternity leave is one of those things that, there's federal guidance around what is required. So everybody is entitled to leave when they have a child. Whether you're male or female, you're entitled to job protection. The question then relies around am I getting paid while I'm out? And, I haven't seen where maternity leave is something that you can negotiate for pay or not pay. Most companies already have this mandated in a policy. And that goes back to an equity and, legal standpoint of we can't give a benefit to one person and not the other. But it's definitely something that you should be considering as you come into negotiations of what is your paternity or maternity policy, to understand how does that weigh into other options. And I always lay out, a side by side of here's my current company or current situation and here's my new, and lay out those pros and cons and cost differences so that you can really be looking at apples to apples. Every job has salary, most have bonus, time off, medical costs, but then that maternity leave, extra leave, those ancillary benefits are ones that you should be putting in. Where's the benefit way, and what's the cost advantage to that?
The only thing I would add from a personal standpoint is that sometimes it's interesting to see how the position will allow the reentry. When you're done with the maternity leave, how is it okay? You had your leave, now you're back on your track 100%, no excuses, no nothing, or is there sometimes a little ramp up time? I know with our company, and we're a smaller company. We're only a couple hundred employees worldwide. But with our company, we typically try to work with someone. So if they're like, well, okay, I've had my weeks or months or however long it is, I'm ready to come back. Well, okay, you can ease back into it. And I think part of that, it's not just physical, but there's a mental, emotional aspect of things, balancing the different balls in the air, et cetera. That's a softer one. So that's one where you're gonna have to talk to some others and try to get a feel for. And one of the things I do with companies is they always ask you for references. It's fair for you to ask them, is there someone I can talk to? And you sometimes you have to talk to a couple people, because just like in references, we always give good. I'm not going to give. If somebody fired me, you're never going to hear that reference. Well, they may do the same thing, and so you've got to just listen very carefully about how people phrase things. So.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people did that for graduate school, seeing if the lab's good. The next one is, are there tactics that make negotiation more likely to be successful? What do you recommend?
Well, I'll start, and then Uriah. I think Uriah already mentioned a lot of the key factors here, and that is really knowing what you want, really trying to understand kind of the as best you can the parameters of the folks you're negotiating with. So in other words, if the parameters are $50,000, you come in asking for $100,000, probably not going to happen, right? So so that being informed is very, very important. Being really listening to what's important to them, and in your own heart understanding what's important to you, and being honest, because you can say, well, that's not, or this is not, or and vice versa. It never works in the end. So it's good to have those things set in your mind. What's really important to you? Again, I think the things Uriah laid out a couple of questions ago are really important.
Yeah, I think I echo what Jeff just said. Having the information behind your negotiation is what's most important. The same as you will all defend your thesis and everything in postdoc and all that. It's why are you making the decision? And I think this is where you need to be really honest with the company, of understanding what is the risk reward for me, and there has to be some type of payback from the company, but at the same time, the company is making a risk on you, because all they know from you is paper and interview. And from my standpoint, and Jeff, you as well, there's a lot of risk involved with that. So understand that this is a give and take. Don't go all in or shoot for the moon. Be realistic in this, and that's how the best outcome is going to come for both sides.
Oops. Do y'all mind for this question also touching on like the hard versus soft approach that y'all brought up earlier?
Sure. Since I'll start it. So you might say in your own mind, you know what? I need $50,000, 3 weeks vacation. I need a conference travel allowance. That's another area, particularly in academia. And I need these things. And if you don't kind of give me those things, then I'm out of here. And you may not use those words, but that's the effect. So if you're going to do that, sometimes it can work, right? I mean, because here's another reality. Fortunately or unfortunately, this negotiation will actually last you for a while. You can't, it's hard, particularly in industry, if you go in and you negotiated X, and the next year you really want 50% more than X, you're not going to get it. And I don't care how good you are. It's just very unlikely that happens. So you're going to get one chance to negotiate. And I'll give you a good example. The person I just hired, we had a range, and I sort of, at least from my standpoint, I said, well, here's what we're offering. And it was fair. And we could have done a bonus and everything, but they didn't ask for it. So I didn't give it. Had they asked for it, I might have been able to give them a little bit more. But if they come in and say, I want this, this, and this, the attitude and the culture fit, if I'm being a wolf on Wall Street, to use that sort of thing, maybe that's the approach I take. But in a cooperative environment, if I come in that hard or that harsh, it's probably not going to fly very well from a cultural fit standpoint. And the way you negotiate and how prepared you are also speaks volumes. But by the way, that's a two-way street, right? How they do it speaks volumes, and how you do it speaks volumes. And that, the impression is to me, it's actually very, very important.
No, I totally agree, Jeff. I think the thing to remember in negotiation is the company always has the upper hand at this point. So, they can rescind an offer, they can do whatever they want. So you are still at the company's mercy. So you still need to act professional, courteous, kind. But again, if you're clear, concise of this is why I'm asking for this, most companies are rational. We're all people as well. But, like Jeff mentioned, and I can say it from, being in multiple industries, like you said, you have one chance to, really make your case as you come in. Otherwise, you're pretty bound to a 3% raise every year, maybe get a promotion every 3 to 4 years and take a 5 to 10% jump. But you're not going to take an exponential jump once you get in. But on the flip side, or, staying on that same topic, that doesn't mean that the company is going to lowball you right away just to save dollars. So if you I want to make $75,000 and the company comes and offers you $75,000, don't think that they're lowballing and you can go and ask for 80 now. Be respectful in that nature of, this is what I wanted. They came at me and gave me that, and I should be thankful or appreciative that, they're being respectful on the first pass. And that's the thing to think about. We're always, as candidates and on that side of the table, you always think there's more, but sometimes, oftentimes the business we have lots of data behind the decisions. We have internal equity. We are making the decision and offer that we're willing to pay for from a business standpoint.
Perfect. Well, on that, this kind of mirrors it, and maybe you've already answered it, but are there any tactics that should be avoided? And if you feel like there's something to add, we can go to the next.
I think we can probably jump.
Okay. So what are important things to think about bringing up in like the initial negotiation? Like, it sounds like you kind of highlighted the process. So the first time you go in, or does that question make sense?
Yeah, so when I think of initial negotiations, I think when we say negotiation, we automatically jump to the end when an offer is made. But really, you should be bringing up pieces throughout the whole interview process. So if you're going on a Europe trip, right after graduation, et cetera, you should be bringing those things up. Hey, I know we're interviewing here in March. I graduate in May, but I'm going to be gone until July. Does that pose a risk to this offer? Or, so being upfront as you're going through, but it's a process. It's not here's the offer, now we negotiate. It's picking up all those pieces throughout and sharing both ways. Just like the company has its advantages and downfalls, you as an individual have advantages and downfalls. And so sharing those up front, being honest of what are those things that could impact your ability to work, and being, forthcoming with that, instead of getting the offer and saying, oh yeah, next week I take off for 3 weeks through Europe, so can I push this start date?
Yeah, the only thing I have to add, if there's anything sort of along the lines, if there's anything that's important to you, uh, really important up front from a timing standpoint, or this is kind of what I need standpoint. I don't do well on the 87th floor. Those kinds of things. It would probably be good. The person I hired said that they had a big bonus coming in December, and I interviewed. I think it was back in October. Or maybe it was before then, and they said they can't really start till January. And I liked the person well enough to say, fine, you can start in January. But that was at the beginning. It wasn't at the end. I get pretty upset at the end when people start. I just find that's bad faith in negotiations when along the way you knew this and you didn't say it till now. That's not acceptable. And that really, for me personally, that's a very bad taste in my mouth. Just good integrity along the process. No surprises would be the best way to go, I think.
No, but I think that's a great point, Jeff, too, of, that was something the employee brought up proactively. And I think I like when employees or candidates bring that up, like, hey, I have a big bonus that's paid out in December. I know that's 2 months away, but I just want you to know. That puts the ball back in Jeff's court of, I can either delay this till January, ensure they get paid, or I could offer a sign-on to offset it if I need them next month. But now they've put the ball in my court rather than an offer coming in end of October and them saying, oh, well, if I leave now, I'm out 25,000. So, things like that, again, this is a two-way street. Communication is vital. And at the same time, what's really interesting, and I'm not saying you all are guilty of it, but as we see this next generation that's coming through college, and I've dealt with bachelors and that much more common than grad students and PhDs, check your emails. Companies have a timeline just like you all have a timeline. And it's amazing how many people don't check their emails as they're going through the interview process. And it's 2 weeks later and we have to call them and say, hey, did you get that? Oh, I never checked my email. Well, that shows some poor faith on yourself too. And I guarantee that's going to change a hiring manager and HR manager's decision or mindset as they continue the process. So if you're in the interview phase and an application phase, you should be checking your emails daily, if not multiple times a day.
Yeah, that sounds like a good practice. So, are there any topics you should avoid? So you talked about honesty, integrity, but maybe there's something you shouldn't say in the beginning.
Uriah, you're going to say it? Usually we say, don't talk about sex, religion, or politics. And we say, generally speaking, stay away from a lot of personal stuff. Like, let me share with you this sadness that I carry with me. And it just has, kind of, or my depression, or that's just generally not something that should come up. If people ask you, and if people ask you personal questions that are inappropriate, you just have to, and most won't. This is, we're in a much better age now than when we have been historically. But you don't have to answer any of those questions, and try to avoid answers that I would say it this way: if you have a significant other involved in the decision in terms of moving someplace, then at some point that is a natural thing to come up. But I would say stay away from anything that might be controversial.
Yep, I would agree. I think, during interviews and negotiations, it's a professional conversation. That's not to say we have to be inhuman and, if you mention, oh, I coach my kid's softball team or things like that, that's natural. It comes up and maybe on your resume, whatever. But try and keep it professional. We don't want to sway interviewers' mindsets. And I know it's in interviewing 101 for every company of don't ask about sex, religion, all those hot button items. But I think, one thing that you see out there that's a no-no, never ask money, don't talk money early on in the stage. I think it's important up front, and the way I usually, like to phase it from my end. And so the first 5 years of my career was compensation and analytics and that. So I have a heavy background in this. What is the salary range? Very few jobs post that this is what the salary range is. And it's, again, different as you're coming out of academia into your first job, but as you're going from one company to another, it's a fair conversation to have of what is the expectations of this role, because a research scientist here can pay completely different from a research scientist there. And so you're not asking or demanding I need X, but you're building that understanding, and you can very clearly say, okay, that's within expectations, or, oh, sorry, my understanding based on this role and my needs are X. And is that something we can overcome, or should we, end this decision now? Because no company wants to spend, hours and hours or weeks of time if we can figure out right up front, if there's a $40,000 gap, we're probably not going to overcome it. And so think of those things up front that are going to be deal breakers for you, and get those out up front in a respectful tone again of what is this, can you help me understand, and share with the recruiter or whoever that first contact is that these are non-negotiables for you, or you have to have this baseline, and you don't want to waste their time or yours if we're not in alignment.
Yeah, that's really good information. So the next thing, is there a way to practice for negotiation?
Oh, I mean, it's uncomfortable. It's as you will all, there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations that happen in the real world. And so I don't think there's a great way to practice, but again, have those notes in front of you, know what you want, lay that out. And I always like to follow up with an email. If you're in a negotiation, make sure you got your point across. If they offer you and you come back and say, hey, that's not quite where I was expecting XYZ, follow up with an email, be respectful. I'm excited to get this offer, love XYZ about the company and the opportunity. To reiterate what we spoke about on the phone, here's where I sit. And follow those up, make sure you're clear so that you're not going back and forth, because I'll tell you usually get one shot. You don't get multiple options to go back and forth. If they come back to you and you say, oh, I should ask for more, you get one chance and you're done. And if it goes to the second chance, the company's gonna question their decision.
Yep, I agree with all that. I think, Chandler, that you all can do some mock interviewing with each other and kind of see how that goes. I think that would not be a bad idea. But it goes back to, I think, something Uriah and I have both been saying, and that is, there is information out there. And it's not perfect information, but you can definitely get a range. And the other thing that Uriah said is, what are your needs? So you may say, I'm moving to New York City. So a $50,000 offer in New York City is different than a $50,000 offer in Georgia, or Kentucky, or San Francisco. So you all have to kind of understand what your needs are as well, and that's just part of understanding. And I think Uriah mentioned something earlier, and that was know what you want. And I think that's pretty important in terms of having an understanding. And it isn't, I want 52,000 or nothing. It's, this is kind of really, I've worked a budget. I've kind of thought about what I'm willing to do. This fits what I'm trying to do. Because you don't want to take an offer, and then as soon as you take it, you're like, you know what? I can't make ends meet. It just doesn't work in New York City to do $50,000. So, by the way, that involves, especially if you're going someplace else, to start to understand the cost of living in different places. And that data is available. It'll say if you live in Georgia, let's say the index will have 100 for Georgia. It might have 152 for New York City. It might have 82 for Louisville, Kentucky. And so you start to understand, and that's, again, you guys do, this is what you all have done for all these years and do very well. And that is research, even with very limited data, right? Very limited availability. You pull the best pieces you can together. And then what I would do is, you have some professors that have helped you along the way. You all probably know some people in industry and academia. Maybe just, those that are close to you, you maybe use them as sounding boards to say, this is kind of what I'm thinking. This is the data I have. Does that seem reasonable? Well, you're crazy because, nobody ever pays that much or whatever.
Sounds good. And then this is probably our last question, but are there any resources where we can learn more? Anything that you recommend that's better than us just Google searching?
I think we've talked a lot about it. I think when it comes down to negotiation, all comes down to preparation. If you prepare yourself, which, if you guys were coming out 20 years ago, we'd be in a lot different situation, but you have so much information at your fingertips. Utilize it, make your list, talk about it with, like Jeff just said, talk about it with your professors. And there's, I could tell you could go out and take an online course of how to negotiate. You can do it. But just remember, it's not something you're doing every week or every year, or, hopefully not every year or every week, but you're only going to do it every once in a blue moon. So it's not something you have to master. No one's, an expert at negotiation, although Jeff may say differently. In the sales world, they're pretty wizards at negotiating. But it's going to be uncomfortable. And I think the sooner you can address that this is an uncomfortable conversation, the sooner you can get over it and get through it. And you're all factual based individuals. Most researchers are. So just go with your gut and present those facts.
And I would say it's us against them. It's not that kind of I wouldn't have that kind of perspective on it, that they're like against me. If you're talking to a potential employer, then the theory is that we're both trying to work this together. And again, you'll always get some, what I call hockey pucks, some people that just are ornery, mean, whatever. Hopefully you can read that and figure that out. And if it's really trying to get to a win-win, then I think that's important. And I don't know any negotiation books off the top of my head, but I think that whole aspect of preparedness and integrity and sort of sequencing things and running it by someone and saying, so we've talked about lots of things, right? We've talked about potential hiring dates. What can we delay it? We've talked about different aspects of benefits. I think we've covered kind of most of the areas that you all will end up kind of walking over and kind of looking inside and say, what's really important to me? So.
I also think, and this is going to relate to individuals that, maybe your parents don't work in a professional situation, and everyone's different here. But I'll say my parents were blue collar. They worked in factory and local small town newspaper. So you have to remember who you're talking about when you go through your negotiations. When I told my parents, I'm going to ask for the sign-on of X, they said, whoa, they're already offering you this. Are you serious? And so just remember, times have changed for some people you talk to and what their experiences are. Because again, you get one chance. And so you can't be greedy, but you also, need to be respectful of what you bring to the table and be paid accordingly as well.
Great. Okay, so real quick, since we have time, Jeff, I'll let you share your last slide, and then we'll switch to questions from the chat from participants.
You're on mute, Jeff.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks. Got it. I do that in real time too. So I'll go back to kind of what the first slide that I showed. How much is someone worth as far as compensation? And compensation is not just the salary. It's all those other things that Uriah and I talked about. So just some things to think about. People buy for their reasons, not ours. Part of the negotiation and part of the interview process is, what is it that whoever the hiring entity is, what are they looking for? And how well do you meet that need? That's really important to understand, to walk a mile in their shoes. When you're negotiating, you've got to think about that. This is kind of what they're looking for. All those market dynamics that I talked about with that crazy coin, same thing applies. That's out there. So if there's 800 of you interviewing for one position, your negotiation it's going to be more difficult. Similarly, if there's one of you and there's 800 asking, again, you're going to be in a more advantageous position. What's the budget of the entity that you're negotiating with? Uriah said this, and I don't know if you all picked it up, that usually there's a, we have equity within a company. So we can't hire someone in, for $50,000 when everybody else is making $20,000. So it's important to kind of understand that. What is it that they really want? What is it that they're looking for? So those are just things we talked about. And I've got this kind of, and this is interesting. So this is a passage from the Bible, believe it or not. You might not recognize it because I've got three different versions of it, three different, it's from something called the Book of Romans. But this is actually very important. Do not think of yourself more highly, but sober judgment. Think the second rephrase of that same thought is don't think more highly of your importance and ability than you ought to, but also, think of sound judgment, not too high, not too low. You don't think you're better than you really are. You must see yourself as you are. That's very important. So you guys have done a great job. You're studying very hard. You've passed a lot of hurdles so far. So you've got to think rightly. So I've got this skill set. On the other hand, you might not be the greatest thing since sliced bread. So there's a balance there. And what are your goals? What are your needs? What are your wants? That's very important. And just the one, Glassdoor.com, in terms of, you can click on salary negotiation. There's a few of these sites. LinkedIn is another one that has, and what I do is I read several things, and I'm just going to stop sharing here. I read several things, and then, what I try to do is arbitrate between those different sources and then kind of go from there. So that's it, Chandler. I just had that couple minutes.
Okay, great. So we'll just go in order from the questions from the audience as they are in the chat. So the first one's from Catherine, and it says, how can graduate students know what is standard or normal within or between companies when they haven't had a career before?
Yeah, so, everyone here is just coming out or will be coming out from grad school, right? Or doctoral?
Most likely, yeah.
Okay. So, it's hard. And even once you're in, the real world or in a company, it's still hard to understand what the others have. And so I think, and we've all heard the quote, the grass isn't always greener. But again, you have to make the decisions based on your personal, demands and needs of what's important to me. And many of you have the opportunity right now to say, I want to live in X. And that's a choice you're making. And so if I want to live in Bismarck, North Dakota, I'm probably not going to make $200,000 a year like I would living in a giant metro. So think of those things. And, a lot of it's just learning along the way. Use your resources. You're all in college, have a ton of contacts through professors and alumni networks, etc. Leverage right now. Everyone wants to help at the core. So work those networks and find out if you can get more information, especially as you're interviewing with companies. If you can find someone that works there that's not on the hiring panel that through a friend or another contact, hey, what's it like? What's the culture? What's this? What's that? To give yourself that insider view, that's going to be your best look at inside of what it's like inside of the company. And in this industry, everyone's connected to someone else in the other businesses. So if you can't find someone out there, you're not looking hard enough.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the only thing I would sort of put next to that is the environment you move into is probably as important. I might argue even more important than the compensation. When I say compensation, I mean the whole package. You've got to be comfortable with the people. When you interview, do you feel like yourself, or do you feel like you have to put on a mask and sort of, gee, the company's like this and I'm like this. Gee, the people seem really friendly and warm. I like that vibe. Or gee, that was kind of stilted. And those are very important factors. And yes, the network is how you're going to find out what other people are making. And there is lots of information out there. So you'll get it. You might not know, oh, this is worth 171,000 or 16,000 or whatever, but you'll get kind of a range. And I think it's good when negotiating to have in your own mind a range. And to have, if someone was to ask you, why do you think you should get this for $110,000? Then you can go back and say, here's why. You have your facts straight.
Great. Okay. So I hope that answers Catherine's question. I think so. The next question is from Brittany, and it says, going back to the idea of being upfront with employers during negotiation, will you be able to negotiate a start date based upon your graduation date?
So I would say that more than likely yes, because again, you all aren't coming into it's not like you surprised anybody. Oh, look, we're graduating, and gee, I'm the only one on the planet that wants to take a month or two to do something else before I start. I would imagine that's a fairly common thing, and this is the window to do it, right? But the only thing I would say that is to listen carefully. In my case, when I hired that person, I liked the person well enough that I was willing to take a risk. It's going to hurt me our fiscal year. It will hurt me from a financial standpoint to make that hire, because by waiting 2 or 3 months, we missed the optimum window. I decided for me that was worth it. But there may be an urgency. It may be, and I'm going to use you, Chandler, it may be peanut planting season. And if I need you on that day or in that window, but that's going to be, I think that'll be the exception rather than the mainstream thing.
Yep,
Okay,
totally agree. I mean, especially right now, we're April. If you're graduating in May, everyone understands you're graduating in May. So they already understand that. Now, again, have those conversations up front. Most people are going to be flexible to a point. But again, if you tell them you want all summer off because you're backpacking through Europe, that may change the conversation.
Okay, another question from Zara. It says, if you say this is my price range and then the company says it's too high, can you negotiate for a graduated increase, or can you negotiate for an increased percentage in general?
That's something, so usually companies aren't going to agree to something that's longer term. But I think it's something understanding, again, laying out and being upfront. If the company says their range is 50 to 70,000 and you say, I need 75,000, having that conversation of, hey, this is where I had in my head. This is why. Are we too far apart, or do you think that's something we could come to terms on? Having that conversation up front and just being really open and owning that this is your personal decision and that's what's right for you, the same as the company's making that decision of that's what's right for them. Sometimes they say, yep, we have a little wiggle room. Other times they may say, no, we're bound. We have internal equity that we have to keep within, and so we can't change. And then you just, say, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity, and something else comes up down the road, I'd love to chat.
Yep, I agree with all that. I think if the range is, in that range, 70 to 75 is fairly small. 70 to 100 is fairly large. The other thing I would say, and I would advise this very strongly, whatever you get as an agreement, make sure it's in writing. If it's not in writing, it's not worth anything. And if they're not willing to put it in writing, then they don't really, it's not really, it's just a verbal agreement that we'll have. I appreciate that. And even if it's not maybe in the formal contract, send me an email that confirms that. Something so that I have it. Because not that people are lying or anything else. I'm not going to take that at all. It's just that people get busy. There's lots of things they forget. And they're like, well, I can't really, I don't. So whatever unusual or off the track thing that you get them to agree to, I would suggest you get it in writing.
Okay, so for our last question from Zaki, it says, if I'm coming from a job in academia and joining a company, do they consider my previous organization where I'm coming from and offer a lower range, since like in academia, you're probably being paid less?
So I'll say from a company standpoint, what you're previously making matters to a point, but every large organization or organizations that you're going to be joining, we have mounds of data and we have structures and all that. So you're not going to get a low offer just because that's what you're making today. And there's so much legislation out there right now making that illegal in different states. But most companies have a job structure of, let's say, a grade 3 through 20. They all have a range of 50 to 70, 70 to 90, et cetera. And that job is aligned within that market. So they're paying for the market of the role. And that goes to, the company can't hire someone if they're not paying the market rate. So you're not going to get a lower offer just from where you came from. But before I forget, and I know we're running out of time, the one thing is you all are coming out of academia, out of school. What is your unique skill or trait that you bring to this process? You all have to admit that you don't have 10 years of experience. That's not, that's obvious. but what do you bring different that maybe someone with 10 years of experience doesn't? Have you been working on these new skills or systems, technologies? Are you more adaptable? That's what you have to sell as your advantage during the whole interview and negotiation process of what differentiates you. Because again, there could be 50 going for this one job. What's going to set you, Chandler, or you, Brittany, apart from the rest of the candidates?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Wow, so food for thought to end on then. So we just want to thank both the speakers for doing this for us, like volunteering. It's really great of them, and I hope everyone enjoyed it, and I hope you can join for the next webinar as well. So we're recording this, and we will put it on YouTube if you want to rewatch this. So thank you, everyone.
Take
Thanks,
care, Chandler.
Chandler.
Stay safe. Nice to meet you, Uriah.
Yep, you too, Jeff. Hey, Chandler, feel free. You can share my contact information at least.
Okay.
If there's any follow-ups. Again, I won't get specific on Corteva or anything like that from a, that standpoint, but if there's general guidance I can share, I'm happy to do so.
Yeah, we appreciate that, so people can follow up with questions. Thank you so much.
Same here, Chan.
Thanks.
Okay, got it. I'll send it out later today then.